I am so grateful that you decided to take a little bit of time to speak with me about Black Panther: Sons of the King. Um, I know you wrote specifically. You wrote you're credited to have written the fifth, sixth, and ninth episodes. But were you a part of the writing team's general meetings for the general narrative from start to finish?
So I arrived right at the end when they'd already had the writers' room kind of fleshing the story out. But it was really cool to jump on and see what everybody had been had been working on because they said Black Panther and I was like, oh, I mean, of course I love Black Panther, but I don't know what the angle is. And once I'd seen what they had fleshed out, I was really, really excited because Rudiada was involved, and of course, it's got like a little bit of a South African background. It's got all of these Afrikaans South Africans who moved there and oppressed the people there. So I was like, yes, I have a little bit of a history here. I know what's going on. So I was excited that that was included.
Yeah, and have you always lived in Africa? Is it South
Yes,
Africa?
yes, I have.
Uh,
Yeah, South Africa, my whole life.
okay, that's awesome. So the 20, just out of curiosity, the 23-hour flight, was it to or from Africa?
It was two. So I was in France for 4 months doing a writer's residency, and I literally started. I had to take the train from Nancy to Paris, and it started I think at 2 p.m. on Sunday, and I arrived here in Cape Town at 4 p.m. on Monday. I was so miserable.
Aw, uh, I recently flew for like 2 hours, so I can't imagine. I can't imagine 23. Um, but it's back to Black Panther. So I read the fifth and sixth episodes. I haven't heard them obviously, but I did read the arc for the fifth and sixth, and I'm gonna try not
Mhm.
to give too many spoilers. But I read part of the ninth episode, but the fifth and sixth specifically, I feel are very heavy with female characters, and I'm curious if you specifically focused on those, or were asked to focus on those. That way, you could um, actually kind of contribute to these female characters' female perspective.
Well, I've always been interested in the women of Wakanda. I mean, if there's a comic book, I want to know where are the women, what are they doing, like what parts are they playing. So there was an outline of what should happen, and it just naturally happened that way that I I just felt such a strong connection with Queen Ramonda because she's also a South African, and Shuri is one of my favorites. So I wanted to make sure that I did her justice as well. So in the outline, it had what was going on, but it was up to me to sort of flesh it out, and that's just how it played itself out. That I focused on the women of the story.
So I know that you are a writer and you are also a singer, songwriter. But have you ever worked in on a comic book related project before this?
Before this, I work on Kwezi, which is South Africa's first black superhero, and um, I had never worked in comics before Kwezi. I just knew that it was very beautiful, but I had a moment at one of those conventions where I met the creators, and I said, "Listen, your comic is really beautiful, but I can help you improve the story if you want to. I just feel like the writing could be better." I know that's not a great way to apply for a job, but um, they were quite open to it. And so I started working on Kwezi from issue 7 to where we are now, issue 15.
That's awesome. I'm curious of how much knowledge you have of the Black Panther comic books, or if your initial familiarity with the character was based on your introduction with the recent movie.
So my introduction to comics has been quite interesting because when I was younger, I used to read Wendy, Spooky, Casper. Who am I leaving out? Richie Rich, and the Archie comics. That was kind of my introduction to comics when I was much younger, and it was only when my younger brother. So being able to read and make his own choices that he introduced me to superhero comics. And so he's my superhero. I call him my superhero dictionary. Anything I need to know about a superhero, my brother knows. So my introduction to Black Panther was through my brother's love of comics many years ago. And I don't think I would actually be writing comics if it wasn't for my brother introducing me to, you know, the superhero ones, not my spooky Caspers and Wendy's.
So, what kind of impression did the Black Panther film make on you before you knew that you're going to be involved in this project?
I was just amazed at how this was a global moment for Black people. You know, I like to think of these moments that happen that influence influence a lot of other things, and that for me was a real moment. And because of also the costume design borrowed from some of our cultures in South Africa, I think we were just so excited. And at this point with MCU, I mean, I've been there since Eric Norton's Hulk, so I've been fully invested from
Yeah,
the beginning,
yeah.
and I was just so excited that at this moment, after the 11 plus years that I've spent with MCU, we finally got Black Panther,
Hmm.
and that the representation was so beautiful. It wasn't a caricature of anything. It was really important. It was an important moment for me as a comic book nerd, and also just as a creator.
Yeah, and they really represented the regal side of that character more than the superhero side, which I thought was really, really great. And I feel like that's something that is written in Black Panther Sons of the King, is trying to find a balance of, a hero and a king. Um, so I am curious of how you approached the Black Panther point of the actual T'Challa point. Did you have any influence on the character from Chadwick Boseman's performance while you were actually writing the chapters that you wrote?
You know, it's difficult. I won't even lie and say I wasn't influenced by how Chadwick brought this character to life. It was difficult. As I was writing, all I saw in my head was Chadwick, and I'm so thankful that I had a real life reference point, as opposed to just the comics. And I think Chadwick brought a certain life to the character, a certain dignity. And every time I wrote T'Challa's scenes, I was always thinking of that dignity that Chadwick brought to the role.
That's amazing that you say that. So I know you mentioned Ramonda, that you really feel like she's a character that you loved, that you were able to contribute to. But you also wrote a bit with Okoye, Shuri, several other female characters.
Yeah,
Um,
Misty Knight as well.
yeah. Misty. I was so excited that Misty Knight was in the book. That was amazing. Which character? I know that I hate asking like what's your favorite, but which character do you feel like you most related to, female wise, when you were writing them? Because you probably wrote like seven of these females in the chapters that you were in.
I think I related most to Shuri in this particular story because I too am a daddy's girl, and when when I was writing, now I'm trying to avoid spoilers. When
Yeah.
I was writing what she was going through, I put myself in her shoes and I thought if this was happening with my dad in real life, I wasn't just gonna thug it up and go, oh well, there would definitely be some turmoil. And so I related most to Shuri in the story because I know if anything like that happened with me and my father, it would take me a minute to kind of gather my bearings. I'm trying so hard not to give away spoilers.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, wrestling with memories of your father, at least, I feel like that is the memory of your father. You know what I mean? Dealing with the memory of your father. That's a very wide way to describe it without trying to give any spoilers. Um,
Yeah, and also I think I got the opportunity also to show her that she's not just, the genius of the family. I wanted to kind of show the different elements of Shuri in the story where, yeah, she does rely on her brother, but sometimes she has to do the difficult things.
and I think it was also expressed that like she falls on like her humor when she's actually nervous or she's scared. I think it says something like that in one of the chapters.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's really interesting because I don't think that's something that was really expressed in the movie. Um, so I love little details like that. Now, without giving spoilers, there is, we'll say, a antagonistic character
Hmm.
that is involved. I think it's a in the seventh. I'm sorry, the sixth. You wrote five and six. I think in episode six there is definitely like a villainous character,
Hmm.
which like made a huge turn, like completely flipped the tone of the story like on its head. Um, and you went from writing like it was such like a jaw drop. How did you handle the tone shift when you were approaching that specific thing? I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking
I know
about.
exactly what you're talking about. It's so interesting because when I first got the outline, um, we got to that part and I was like, oh my goodness, why did I not see this coming? And I had to also look at you know, lots of people say they enjoy writing villains. It's very difficult for me. I like badly behaved characters, but I don't know if I like villains. And what happened was when I got to that part, I had to put myself in the shoes of the villain, right? And think, yeah, now I'm trying not to give spoilers, and really think about where that person was coming from, because so far, and this happens a lot in superhero movies or comics, where we don't really get to see where the villain is coming from. It's always some silly thing like, oh well, I want to destroy this, or I'm getting back at someone. And this time I had the opportunity to actually put myself in the character's shoes and think about how they would have grown up and what would have brought them to that point. Because no one just wakes up bitter and becomes a villain. And so that was a very important thing that I did. I actually had to pause my writing and then think about the next part of the story moves along because of these things that happened way before we come to this point in the story.
But I loved that even though it was like a twist, you did weave in little, like there was that story was already um, I think it was in chapter five that you kind of weaved in the seeds of that story so that people would be familiar with that, what it is. While that twist happens, then he says, that kind of influence of,
Yeah.
as they reference it in the story, the journey. I think Misty says the journey from hero to villain. It just depends on like the women. What do they call them? With the women that with the bats and things like that. Um,
Oh yeah, I forgot the name, but you do sort of get this sense that everyone is the main character in their own story, and even though they're the villain in your story, in their story they're not. And I think that's what I was trying to make sure that that comes across, that every single person in the story is the main character in their own story, and when they all come together, there are certain intersections where, well, you look like a bad guy from the perspective of the bad guy.
And I think that's funny because towards the beginning of the series, which I think is in the first chapter, I know you didn't write it, but I think that's expressed pretty well. Like there's some times in the series that I really like. It's like the perspective is kind of shifted,
Mm,
and like the villain in the first chapter, towards the end of the first chapter or episode, kind of like it turns into the writing is like about him or like his kind of point of view or that
yeah.
villain's point of view, which I think is really cool. Um is the it, did you know about the entire arc beginning to end of this series before you started writing your specific chapters?
Yes. So when I joined the team, I think I was the last person to join the team. That had already been fleshed out, and of course, everybody was like, "If you have input, if there's something you want to change," but we knew these are the bones. This is the beginning. This is the end. Everything that happens in the middle is really up to us. How do you want to express it? And I have to say, some of the things that Jeff wrote, because he's got Jerry's got an episode before mine. He wrote it so well that I was well challenged once I saw it. I was like, "Oh, don't be so brilliant all the time."
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I can't wait to talk to Jeffrey. But yeah, that is awesome that you're able to, pick up what this person that you admire their work has laid, and then add your, make it even better. Add your perspective to kind of add that up, kind of like how you said you approached the other comic job as like, hey, I can write this better for you. How did you become involved in the Black Panther series? How in Sins of the King? Is it something where you were approached because you're a very prominent creative in South Africa, or is it something that you had to similarly apply for?
So I think this was a little bit of both. That when Comic Con first came to South Africa, I had conversations with lots of people, and I'm quite like, "Hey, I'm here, I exist, don't forget about me." So I think there was an element of that, but I do also know that a friend of mine, Lauren Bierkus, she worked on the Jessica.
Jessica
What did she
Jones.
work on? Yeah, she worked. I was just about to say Jessica Simpson. I don't know where my
Oh, yeah.
mind is.
Yeah, Jessica Jones playing with fire, I think, is the other one.
Yes, she worked on Jessica Jones, and I think she then told the guys at Cereal Box that, listen, here's somebody that you know you should be talking to. So it was a little bit of me being, "Hey, I'm here," and having friends that believe in me as well.
I think we talked to Lauren when the Black Black Jessica
Jessica
Jones.
Jones.
Yeah, because there's been a few series that have kind of led up to this. The Thor Metal Gods, and then the Jessica Jones playing with fire, the Black Widow. I can't remember what it is. Black Widow, Bad Blood. So were any of those? Do you know if this kind of exists? This Black Panther, Sons of the King exists in the same universe as these other um, cereal box narratives?
That is so interesting. And no, I do not. That's a great question.
Because I love how there's just so many different characters from this universe that are also, maybe not explored, but in the peripheral to remind you like this, this universe, this,
Mhm.
even though the story is very, very centered in South Africa, this also is a part of, I mean, there's a little bit in New York, but you also see in the very first chapter, you see like four other Avengers and characters like Misty Knight appear and things like that. So I'm curious, if any of those characters are eventually going to become linked in a future cereal box thing. But
That's a really good question. But do you know what else I enjoyed? I enjoyed that it was kind of like, well, here are the characters you have at your disposal. And it's like, oh, love Misty Knight. Let me write more Misty, please.
had you watched Luke Cage with Misty Knight in it prior to working on this?
Yes, I had. Yes, I had. I just thought she's so awesome. You know me. I need to find the woman in the story and find out what's happening. What's your part in this story? What's
Where's
your
your
background?
journey? Yeah.
Yeah,
So I can't remember the actress's name who plays Misty Knight, but she's a great actress. She's so commanding
hmm
in the scenes, and especially as the way that they show in the show her perspective, or like how she looks at crime scenes. Did
yeah.
you use that iteration of the character to influence the way that you wrote Misty in your scenes, or at least added on to what Jeffrey already had set up?
Yeah, I think with Misty, I definitely added on to what Jeffrey had already set up, because I think by the time I write Misty, somebody else had already introduced her to the story.
Hmm.
And I think Jeffrey did such a great job. Listen, every time I saw what he had written, I was like, oh, here we go again. My writing better do some push ups here. Um, So I definitely just followed on to what Jeffrey had already done.
You feel like this series and Jeffrey challenged you in a way that you haven't been challenged before because you keep going back to how much you had to like push yourself and kind of tell myself, okay, I got to really raise this bar. I know I can do it, but I gotta go all the way in. Do you feel like this is like one of the biggest challenges that you faced in your writing career? I know you have so many
Oh my.
different parts of your entertainment and media, you singing and everything, but as far as writing goes, do you feel like this specifically is kind of one of the biggest challenges you've done or had to face?
I had never actually thought that. So, as an author, when I write my novels, I know that I can take my time with this, and you get to know the character if I'm writing from a character's perspective, and when it's their inside thoughts and when they're speaking. And when I work on comics, I can rely on the visuals, right? A fight scene is happening, and I can just say, okay, he bashes him into a wall, and they make it happen visually. Writing for audio, I actually had to learn how to describe a fight scene. And this was not something that I'd ever had to do in so much detail. But again, I nearly spoiled something. But there's a lot of moments where I had to describe what is happening physically. And I think that's also one of the challenges, that I can't just lean back and go, oh, I'm an author. So we know these are in his internal thoughts, right? So writing it for audio suddenly challenged me in, how do I tell this story for someone who may not be reading it? And of course, working with such amazing writers, Tanana Reeve, I was really just, I was blown away. This was definitely one of those moments where I think when I left, when we finished the project, I felt like I was a better writer.
That's amazing. I think without giving any spoilers, at the beginning of chapter 5 or episode 5, um, there was a not fight scene, but um, no Okoye, scene between Okoye and the Panther, where you did have
Yeah.
to go into detail, really a lot of detail on the physical aspects and the fighting. So I was curious if you have any background in fighting, or if you had to research that and just express that from your writer standpoint.
Well, so they were sparring, and thank goodness a couple of years ago I took up boxing. Um, And so, I know what a left hook is. I know what a jab is. I know what it feels like when you're sparring with someone and they literally knock the air out of you. So that one was one of the better ones where I was like, okay, I can imagine the choreography,
I
but
could
the rest,
tell. Yeah,
but
I
the
could
rest
tell.
yeah, but the rest of the fight scenes, I literally found myself sometimes standing and asking my best friend, like, what is it when somebody does this to another person? What is that called? Because she loves wrestling. So I was like, is there a wrestling term for this?
If you could explore, would you rather, if you had another chance in this cereal box, world, would you rather continue to explore this uh, another Black Panther series, or would you rather focus on Misty Knight or one of the females that you've now written for?
Well, I think knowing canon, what happens in Black Panther, Shuri definitely has a moment, right? And I would love to explore Shuri some more. I enjoyed writing her so much. Her and Okoye and Misty were some of my favorites. But I think if I had to, I would definitely like to write Shuri, explore the character some more, and see how she grows up.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Um, and I'm trying so hard not to give any spoilers here. But do you feel like the resolution of this story or this the sins of the king, do you feel like the resolution was something to you as a reader or like as a consumer of this media without being the writer aspect? Do you feel like the resolution is something that you felt wrapped up the story with a nice bow, or is there something else that you would have liked to seen explored?
So I'm definitely one of those writers that thinks, I always think, oh, this was wrapped up in a nice bow. And then somebody will be like, no, I want to know more. And I think that is the sign of you enjoyed the story so much. You didn't even realize that we were headed to the end and you wanted to read more because you had that much fun. And this is how I feel about this. When we finally got to the end, I also kind of felt like, no, I want more. But it's only because it's such a thrilling story. You go through so many emotions that you don't even realize that we're coming to the conclusion now. And that's what I like about it. So I think it's wrapped up with a nice bow. But as a reader, I feel like, oh, I want more.
So I know you had mentioned the MCU. Obviously, you have a lot of you've loved it since 2008. You know, since Edward Norton's Banner. But have is there specifically, if you were to become involved in writing, you know, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is the Black Panther world and the world of Wakanda the place that you feel like you would be most comfortable exploring? And if that's the case, is Shuri still the character that you'd like to explore the most?
So I think the world of Wakanda is very well established, right? In the MCU, very well established, and MCU Shuri is also, well established. I think I would like to work with a character that hasn't been well established. And one of my favorite characters in the MCU is Rocket, but he's also like, he's we know who he is. I would definitely think about writing someone new, somebody who's going to join the MCU.
I personally, I'd like to see, like, I know there's rumors of Namor and you know, sub Atlanteans, and I'd like to see, you know, an offshoot of Wakanda that, you know, kind of had vibranium underwater, and kind of have another, like, the undersea version based in Wakandan technology of, like, another, like, South African, off the South African coast, in the you know, undersea, like they had mentioned. Okoye was talking about underwater earthquakes and everything. So I'd
Mm.
love to see if that were explored. I wanted to know, what's the biggest difference when you're writing for audio versus just writing novels? Is this the first time you wrote for audio?
Yeah, this was the first time I wrote for audio, and I think one of the biggest differences is so I read my work out loud as an author, but I'm usually reading for rhythm because I like the rhythm of things. But when I read it out loud this time, I needed to know it makes sense. Like, who's speaking, from whose perspective this is happening, and that was good training for my next novel, I think. So I'm definitely going to put a few fight scenes in there, maybe not a few, just like one, just to show off a skill I've learned. But definitely reading it aloud, and just like I used to record what I wrote and then listen to it, and everything that I thought was pretty clear, I suddenly had to go, oh no, that's not actually very clear. I need to go back and have a look at that.
You, I feel like I think I only have you for 30, so I want to hurry up and wrap up so you can get to your next interview.
No, no,
Oh,
you don't have to hurry at all.
oh, okay. So you still have more time for a few questions?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
I'm
So,
just I'm just looking at my watch. Not a
okay.
whole lot of time, but a little
Yeah,
time.
I just had about two other questions. I wanted to ask if you wanted to
Okay, cool.
talk at all about your singing or your other novels. That way, you'd get a chance to plug your other, you know, mediums of work that I know you are still involved in. You mentioned you have a
Hmm.
new book that you have coming out, and I'm sure you're still involved in music in one way or another. So I just wanted to give you a few minutes to be able to talk about those aspects of your career and kind of have a platform to mention those things, even though they're not necessarily involved with Sins of the King.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, music, it's funny. Everybody's like, when's the next album? And I keep telling them that when I wrote my first novel and it was published in 2016, I thought I could do both of those things comfortably. But my writing life has sort of taken over everything. I'm slowly writing songs, but I don't know if that'll ever be anything that I can do this year or next year. So when I was in France, I was involved in a translation of my debut novel, The Yearning. And I think I'm playing around with genre a lot. The story that I'm writing now is a love story, but it's sort of written like a Western. And it takes place in the north of South Africa. I don't know why I chose to do that. I have all the regret every time I sit down and write it, but I'm excited about it. I regret it and I'm excited about it, which tells me maybe it'll be a decent book.
That's great. Do you want to plug any social media, anywhere that fans can find you, listeners, or readers of the article? Anybody who wants to find you to chat about either Sins of the King or anything else, where could they find you at?
I'm on Twitter as Black Porcelain, BLCK Porcelain. I'm often just tweeting about what I've eaten or boring stuff, but I'm also available to talk about the work. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Is there any last things that you wanted to mention about the Sins of the King or the Black Panther series as a whole that I didn't ask you before we let you go?
I just want to say that the Sins of the King is something incredible because we all have such different voices, and we needed to still write with one voice. And having read it all, it's just incredible how we were able to do that. But it's one of those stories that is about a superhero, but it's also about the man behind, the Black Panther mantle. And I think it's an incredible story about family as well and about legacy.
I think that's an amazing point to end on. So I appreciate you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Thank you so much. I am super inspired by you, your creative side, the way that you were able to weave in your own bit into the narrative. It feels like just one story. Like you said, there's like 5 writers, but it's awesome. So thank you so much for being taking the time to speak with me. um, is there any
Thank you so
questions you had
much,
for
Joe.
me or Elizabeth? Do you have any questions before I end the meeting?
Nope, no questions on my side.
Okay, awesome. Oh, is there an embargo on when this is to be released?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. I'll
Yeah,
probably cut it and put it out today then and send it over to you.
perfect. Looking
Okay,
forward to it.
awesome. Thank you guys so much. Have a safe
Thank
and
you.
awesome day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.